All right. Good day to everybody listening. I wanted to add some information. So, some of the podcasts are going to be vital information to kind of keep you on top of your own case when dealing with the VA. Part of that is the how to be organized. And what I've been recommending for years, which has been helping considerably, is get yourself a 3 ring binder, preferably a 3 inch or a 5 inch 3 ring binder, so that way you can keep track of everything that comes and goes. So you also get some tab filler sheets so that way you can separate your sections. Some of the sections you might want to have, what I do is my first section is notes, then the second section is received paperwork from the VA, then the third is going to be submitted VA paperwork, then the phone log, statements, and letters submitted to the VA. So you need to make sure you keep a signed copy of everything that you send to the VA. That way you know what's coming and going. Part of it also, knowing that the VA wants you to use e-benefits, and everything that deals with technology is not always great. Now here's my outlook on e-benefits and the pros and cons. The pros are you could upload your documents fairly easy. The cons are you have no record of doing that. So you don't know when they're actually going to look at it or when they receive it. So what I tend to do is I send them a paper copy of everything. That way I can maintain a paper copy of everything. Even in today's digital world, it benefits you to maintain things, to keep a track of what you're doing, and also to be able to know what is what. And this is what I mean by that. So if you were to receive something like a rating decision from the VA, let's say they deny you for your toe disability and you want to appeal that. So you send in your notice of disagreement. However, in order to know when somebody actually signs for it, what you do is you fill out your paperwork, and I've got a list of the paperwork on the Facebook group page, and you print off 2 copies, you sign them, you take one of them, and you mail it. What I usually do is I put a cover page with it. So I write on a Word document, I write exactly what they're receiving and the date and who I'm sending it to, so on and so forth, and my explanation of why I am actually appealing their decision. And I mail it to the processing center. But the way I mail it is I go to the post office and I mail it with signature receipt. So I send it priority mail, so that way it gets there in 3 to 5 days, and I send it signature receipt. By sending it signature receipt, you keep your receipt because you got to pay to send it. You keep your receipt, you wait about 3 to 4 days, you go online to the post office USPS.gov site, track receipt or track package. You're going to be able to punch in the number at the bottom of your receipt. Now, when you get that receipt, what I would suggest is write on top of it what you sent to them and when. So the date should be on the receipt. So you write on top what the package is. Then you wait your 4 days. You go in, you punch in the number, the tracking number on the USPS.gov site, and then you will get a screenshot. In other words, a window will pop up, and what it's going to show you is an image of the person that signed for it. So it's basically the receipt that whoever signs for it at the VA, they have to print their name, sign their name, and date it, the date that they receive it. You take that screen capture and you apply it, or you can screen capture it, paste it onto a Paint, cut it out, paste it onto a Word document, print it. And then you attach that to the package that you submitted. So in your 3 ring binder, in your section for submitted VA paperwork, you can actually print out a image of that signature receipt showing who signed for it and when. That way, in the event the VA says, well, we never received it or we didn't receive it on time, you have a printed record of who signed for it and when. It doesn't matter who signed for it. Anyone that signs for it is accepting that package. Now, the only way to keep track of it, because it's not going to tell you what that package is for, is you taking the receipt and stapling it to your copy of the package. So on your notice of disagreement should be a stapled receipt from you sending that package to the VA, signature receipt. And also, once you get a screen capture of whoever signed for it, staple that, because you're going to have to print it out, staple that to that package as well. That way it shows you sent it and it was received. That way, in the future, in the event they say you didn't send it on time, or you didn't send anything, or you didn't send that specific notice of disagreement, you have proof that you actually did send that packet. Now I say this from experience because I've experienced this actually a couple times before, and I used to recommend people send it certified mail, but the VA got smart to that and started making it to where their leadership were the only ones that could sign for it. So your package could sit at the VA for weeks before somebody actually signed for certified letters, or packages. So by doing signature receipt, it forces somebody at the VA to actually sign for your package. And that is what's going to keep you on top of your what you're doing and what appeal is what. If you end up getting 4 different rating denials or rating decisions from the VA, and you're sending appeals for each one, and they're pretty close together, you're not going to be able to keep track of which one's which. So you don't know when specific ones were signed for. So this is the importance of actually stapling your receipt to your package, your copy of the package, and the date that you actually sent that package out. That way it's in your 3-ring binder and you can easily go through. It keeps you more organized. Once again, you've got to be more organized for your own good, especially when you're dealing with the VA. It's a very big organization and things happen. And if you're me, then things happen all the time. So with that being said, I also have another thing that I want to show, and I'm actually going to attach screen captures to this podcast video, because what I do is I take this audio and I paste it onto software, and I usually add images. So every 5 minutes the image would change. But on this one, I'm actually going to add images for an Excel document that you can use to keep track of everything. You've got to have more than one way to track certain things. And with the Excel document, you don't necessarily have to print it. However, it will help you keep organized. So the Excel document, it's really simple to do, and I will go step by step exactly on how to do it, because it's going to help you out. Matter of fact, I'll even bring up my PowerPoint that I use to slap the information on there. The Excel document, it's fairly simple to use because it allows you to update. What you do is you have columns, A, B, C, D, so on and so forth, and then you have rows, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so forth. And what I do is I use a column and I leave the first cell empty. I use the second cell and I type in just the word disability. And then from row 3 on down to whatever, I list disabilities. So on this example, and you'll see it on the actual podcast, in this example, you will see that I have listed tinnitus, stigmatism, left eye, carpal tunnel syndrome, traumatic brain injury, memory deficiencies, hearing damage, scars, and so forth. Now, this list is not all inclusive. You may have more, you may have less, but what it's going to allow you to do is keep track of all your disabilities. Now, you'll notice that cell A2 just says disability. Cell B2 says VA write-up. So that's information going back and forth to keep you abreast on what the VA had said about what, and so on and so forth. C2 is service connection Y/N. I use that to tell me whether or not I was granted service connection for that disability. The next D2 is percentage sign symbol, so that way I can keep track of the rating percentages that are applied to the disabilities. Then E2 is for miscellaneous. It's for notes for me to keep track of things. Then you'll notice that F, the column F, is blank. It's just empty. And then you go to column G and the word disability is repeated again. Now, this is, you're going to notice you're going to have to scroll to the right to keep track of all updates. And what I do is I end up locking column A. And when you lock column A, all you have to do on Excel is go to View up top. So you're looking on top of the menu. Go to View. You'll see in the middle there, it'll say Freeze Panels or Freeze Panes. You click on the arrow, it'll drop down, and I freeze first column. And as soon as you do that, what it allows you to do is as you scroll to the right, column A remains. So you always see column A. And as you scroll, you'll notice that column B will disappear, column C will disappear. As you keep scrolling, the columns are going to slowly disappear. And what that allows you to do is keep all your disabilities in a row so you can update it accordingly. And in my example, I have the date, let's see the date I used, submitted date 1 January 2004. And then if you look to the right, you'll see it says appeal submitted 6 January 2005. And as you scroll over, so in this image, you're going to notice that all the disabilities are listed as they were, and you're still looking at column A, but all of a sudden the next column is H, and it shows you VA to me 5 June 2005, and then it'll say, you know, what was granted, what was denied, what was service connection or not, what the percentage that was applied, and then in an empty, so in row K under miscellaneous, where there's no disability under column A, under K, you'll notice it says 40% total rating. That's because even though it says 10, 20, 30, 40, 50%, if you use the VA rating chart, which is not done by easy math, it's called VA math, and a lot of people get frustrated, but there's an easy way to actually read it. And if I can remember, I will post a link to a video that will explain to you exactly how to read your rating chart to make it easier for you. But as you scroll over, it allows you to actually start putting in information. So that way your original A column stays as is, and you can still update the disabilities going down further. But what this allows you to do is if the VA combines disabilities for one, you can add those notes in there and update it. So that way, as you scroll to the right and you're updating for every time anything goes out or anything comes in, you'll have an idea of what they're doing. That way, if they granted you 10% on, say, tinnitus and service connection, and that happened 5 years ago, and all of a sudden they come out and they say, we're denying you tinnitus, and you're at 0% and not service connected, you can go back and actually fight them by saying, well, hold on now, in 2004 I was granted service connection and given 10% for tinnitus. Why all of a sudden now are you taking that away? So that way you're not blindsided and you're not sitting there going, I don't know what to do. So just by using an Excel document, it allows you a record to constantly keep track of what's going on. So I'm going to include those images into the video so that way you can actually keep going back. I'm going to try to time it to exactly where I'm talking about it. So that way it'll help you out. But you've got to be organized. So going back to the 3-ring binder, the first section I stated was notes. So I use this section to update what I'm doing or what I need to do, and it allows me to actually remember things without trying to rely on my memory, which is horrible. So the next section is received VA paperwork. All you got to do is 3-hole punch it, stick it in there. But I would suggest going through, reading everything, and removing what you don't need, because a lot of times the VA will put filler paperwork in there that you don't need. Or you just keep the original one, because everything else you get from the VA is going to include the same bits of paper, so you don't need to always keep a hold of it. If it's mentioning your rating or what they decided and why, you want to keep that. But if it's anything else that is like a blank 21-1438 statement form for you to fill out, you don't necessarily need that in your binder. Plus, you can get it online where you can fill it out and then print it already filled out. The next section is submitted VA paperwork. This is the important section because this is your copies of everything you submit that has the receipt on it for signature receipt that you're sending out. And it also has the screen capture image of who signed for it and when. And then you have the next section, which is phone log. Now this is pretty important as well. This is where you really need to get organized. Anytime you call the VA, you're going to want to have the date, the time that you called the VA, and immediately upon somebody answering the phone, get their name. Write that down. And if you can, try to come up with questions to ask before you actually call, so you're not trying to rely on your memory to retrieve questions that you need answers to. So have those written out, but you want to get the person's name that you spoke to first and foremost. So as soon as they answer the phone and you confirm you are who you are, ask them who they are. And if they refuse to tell you who they are, ask them for you to their supervisor, because there's no reason for them not to tell you who they are. Now the next statement or the next section is going to be the statement section, and that's where you can maintain any statements that you sent to support your claim. Then the next section is letters submitted to the VA. So anything that you send to the VA letter-wise, now you're always going to have that signature receipt that should be on there, but I use justification letters to the VA. So the letter submitted to the VA is pretty important. because it's proof of everything that you wrote. Plus, you can always fall back on it when they say you didn't notify us about this, and you can turn around and say, yes, I did, and here's my proof. You need another copy of it. This is why you always include the date on the actual paperwork that you're sending out. So that way, if you need to scan it, it's on there. It doesn't look like you just wrote it on there. So that's for trying to organize yourself a little bit better. You have the 3-ring binder and the keeping track of everything that you're sending, doing it by signature receipt. I think it costs like an extra $1 or $2, which is well worth it in the future, in the long run. It will only help you out. And this is coming from somebody with years of battered experience of dealing with the VA and still dealing with the VA. So lots of unhappy stories. So I'm actually going to organize my experiences in the VA so that way I can remember what I tell, so that way I don't keep repeating myself, which I have a tendency to do if I don't have a good checklist. So hopefully have some good interviews coming up here in the future. But I wanted to also bring up story links. I am constantly updating my Excel document that I have on the group page, because there's always stories. Every single day I get an alert full of stories that don't make the mainstream media, and that's a travesty. One of those stories that came out yesterday, it's on Military Times, and the title of the story is "Unable to Sue the Army for Medical Malpractice. This retired soldier is now fighting the VA for benefits." This is a sad story. A retired Sergeant First Class, Barbara Ospina, is partially paralyzed, in pain, and confined to a wheelchair most of her days. And the reason why she is confined to a wheelchair and in lots of pain is because of malpractice. And what is the VA doing? The VA is denying her caregiver and support and for most of her disabilities that she's putting in for. So as in commonplace, when I had doctors telling me it was all in my head because of, I think it was I can't remember if it was my first parachute accident or my second parachute accident. And like I was passing out from the pain, and just my back was just tore up. And I had this doctor tell me, and he was a military officer, and he ended up getting fired from my team, but he was a military officer, and he would tell me that it was all in my head and that the pain didn't exist. And despite the MRIs and the x-rays, he just didn't want to do his job. He ended up getting fired from my team because he told a officer that something was all in his head. And this officer is a man that me and many of my teammates highly respected. He ended up passing away during a parachute jump. Fantastic guy. Took no garbage from anybody, and he was a leader. And he basically went up to the admiral and told him that if that doctor was there the next morning, then there's going to be a lot of physical problems that occur to him. So they removed him, and lo and behold, they sent him to the military hospital to work. So we still ended up having to be where he was if we went to the hospital. Most of the time, we would just go to our medical and do what was necessary, and maybe go to the clinic if it was something that was a little worse than what our medics could take care of. But now this loser, he definitely was trying to belittle my injuries, and he did that to other people as well. Like I said, he did it to a highly respected officer at my team, and he wasn't going to have that. So he finally got let go, sent to another location, and he was at 05 already, so I don't think he was too worried about losing money. We couldn't sue, being service members, we couldn't sue military doctors or any staff because it was called the Ferris document, which wouldn't allow, it basically protected the medical staff from being sued. It's a 1950 Supreme Court decision prevented from suing the Defense Department for service-connected illness or injury. So the fact that, I think it was my first injury, as a matter of fact, because I remember having to discuss the Ferris document with a lawyer. It said you couldn't sue because of the Ferris document. And matter of fact, it was the lawyer from A Few Good Men, if you've ever seen that movie. Tom Cruise played his part. But I reached out to him, told him my situation. He's like, yeah, you can't sue for malpractice because of the Ferris document. Now, had this doctor actually done the workups that he should have, there's a good chance that I could have gone through the medical support that I needed in order to be fixed. So that way I could have still operated. Because when I got out, it was after 15 years. And I was a lifer. I was planning on doing 20 plus years. I loved doing the job that I did. Some great bunch of guys that I worked with. It was always exciting. Got to work out every day for most of the day. Who wouldn't love that? So I couldn't sue this guy for malpractice because of the Ferris document. Well, because of this young lady who is jacked for the rest of her life because the surgery that she was supposed to have, or that she did have, ended up making it a whole lot worse. She was stationed she was an NCO at the 5th Special Forces Group at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. That's when she started having issues. And she had sent, MRIs, deformity, Cherry syndrome, blah, blah, blah. And her husband was trying to send in information to be apply for caregiver status to take care of her because she can't move. She's paralyzed. She's in a wheelchair most of the day, and she's in pain constantly. So her husband was putting in to get the caregiver stipend, because how are you going to work when you have to take care of your loved one at the house? It's going to make life really, really difficult and expensive. But he was denied. But the malpractice occured at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And it was from the neurosurgeon who ended up, he broke her neck and didn't tell anybody. Her VA disability ratings documents confirm that she suffers from paralyzed cranial nerve and blindness on her left side. So lack of care continues when, this is a quote, the lack of care continues when Barb is admitted for an MRI of her head and is ordered to lay flat without oxygen for an hour. She said, quote, this is despite Barb crying and stating she cannot breathe without her oxygen, end quote. So she was intubated after the MRI, put on a ventilator to help her breathe, but it prevented her from eating or speaking on her own for a month. So her husband wrote, on April 21st, medical staff informed the family of Spinach suffered a stroke. So this poor young lady suffered a stroke. So as they're going further, she was supposed to be receiving hourly neurological checks, and apparently wasn't. So the stroke had gone undetected for days. So I guess this led to extensive brain damage, and she almost died. Then she was transferred to Miami Valley Hospital in Dayton, Ohio, and she had surgery to remove part of her skull to relieve the pressure on her brain. That's insanity. So June 2014, that's when the family learned her neck had been dislocated during the surgery. And that is incredible. It would be extremely rare if it wasn't done negligently. So this neurosurgeon in the military ended up dislocating her neck, and she can't sue him because of the Ferris document. That's insanity to me, that he didn't tell anybody. That's what makes me pretty angry, is the fact that this surgeon messed up and didn't tell anybody about it. And this poor woman's going to have to live like this for the rest of her life. And she had to go through more surgery because they had to remove skull portions and replace it with a ceramic device, and then another surgery to fuse her neck. So she's been found to be permanently disabled because of her medical condition, and that allowed her to retire in 2016. But the VA denied her access to the caregiver program because, it doesn't say, just says a month later the VA denied her access to the caregiver program. You see, it doesn't make sense. And I know somebody else had tried to put in for the caregiver program and they got denied as well. Her paralysis is not going to get any better. Her chronic pain is not going to get any better. And her husband is taking care of her with no help from the VA, which is that's what aggravates me. It wasn't her fault that this surgeon went in, jacked her up, and then doesn't own it. And she has to live with it for the rest of her life. How is that fair? You know, I mean, I live with chronic pain every single day. Every single day. I hear stories like this and I feel fortunate because I'm still able to walk. I may look jacked up when I walk, but I still am able to walk. You know, I don't have a leg to stand on to complain about the pain when there's others so much worse off than I am. And I see that story, which I'll post the link to. I see that story and it just frustrates me even more. Now, the VA has jerked me around. The VA has just had a field day in making sure they denied everything and made it worse. And now, because I've been fighting, I'm making small headway, because any progression forward is good progression, even if it's baby steps. However, I still hear from plenty of veterans that are jacked up, and they tell me about bad treatment. They tell me about their bad experiences. And then I offer to tell their story, and they don't want to have anything to do with it because they're fearful. And that's commonplace, to be fearful that the VA is going to somehow find out who they are and what their story is and then retaliate against them. And I'm living proof that that can absolutely occur, because I've been retaliated against, and it's been many, many years of retaliation and deliberate appointments with specialists who like to write up the way the VA wants them to write up, which doesn't make it good for the veteran. However, you're not going to know that necessarily. How did I find out? Well, after I had a tonsillectomy while I was in, all of a sudden I started having coughing fits and breathing issues. And when I went to go see my surgeon for a follow-up only 2 weeks later, I ended up having a coughing fit right in front of her, so she got to see it. So she said, wow, it sounds like it is this. I'm going to send you to a specialist. So I'm at the military hospital, and I go see said specialist. Well, he was 30 minutes late, right on. I'm always early. It's a pet peeve of mine not to be on time, and by on time I mean early. He shows up half hour late, and he's angry. So that appointment should go well. And it went just as expected. The guy was a knucklehead, and he treated me like an ass because I was there, and he didn't want to be. And so his write-up said, no, it's not this. So that's one of the big things, is they'll tell you what it's not, but it won't tell you what it is and how to deal with it. So, I claimed it as they had described it. The VA denied it. After I got out, the VA denied it and sent me to a specialist because I appealed it. The specialist, who spoke very little English, had told me that it's not that. I said, I understand that. What I'm telling you is that it feels like my throat closes, but I know it physically doesn't, but it feels like it closes and I can't get any air in. And he spent most of the time screaming at me that it's physically impossible for my throat to close. And I spent my time telling him, you're not listening to me. I'm telling you I understand physically that the throat cannot close. I'm telling you that it feels like my throat's closed because I can't get air in. So that didn't go well. He sends the report in that says it's not this. So the VA says you're still denied. So I once again appeal it. Who do they send me to? Do they send me to a different throat specialist? No, of course not. They send me to the same guy. And as soon as he sees me, first thing out of his mouth is, it's not this, your throat can't physically close. I said, I'm going to tell you one last time. It feels like my throat closes. I know it can't close. Unless it's crushed, it's not going to close. However, it feels like my throat's closed because I can't get air in. So it's like drowning, only not being in water. Does that make sense? So what does his report say? It's not this. So the VA denies me again. So I just kept appealing it because that's crap. So we fast forward, and I get sent to a specialist in the next state. And one of the doctors comes in and says, because of my coughing fits, comes in, looks at it, says, did you have big tonsils when you were a kid? I'm like, yeah, I had huge tonsils. And I had strep throat every year. So, first you were too young, then you're too old. So finally I got them out while I was in the service. He said, your tonsils were so big that your palate shortened. So he says, you probably have, trouble drinking any kind of fluid so that it might come out your nose. I'm like, well, yeah, I had to kind of readjust how I do everything. He's like, well, that's it. I'm like, I spent, 15 years and you're the only one that's actually explained it that makes sense. I said, however, it doesn't explain the coughing fits. He's like, well, I don't know what that is. And so I was shuffled away. Okay, thought nothing of it. Now all of a sudden the VA sends me for another appointment, and this appointment is to go over the initial claim again, which is years in the making. So this is what they first said it wasn't. And I sat down with the woman after driving a couple hours to get there. I sat down with the woman, who I'm not sure was a doctor or not, and I said, look, I have no idea why they're trying to claim it is this. I said, I've already sent them literally 3 letters stating that I understand, I accept the fact that it's not that, but you're not telling me what it is. I've readjusted my entire life. I sneeze differently, I cough differently, because if I have a coughing fit, for anybody that witnesses it, it looks like I'm dying. So, and it's kind of embarrassing for me, because if I just get done eating something and I end up having a coughing fit, then it's going to make everything in my stomach come out. So I'm not vomiting. It's just convulsing to the point where it empties. It pushes the contents of my stomach out my mouth. And it's pretty embarrassing if you end up doing that in front of people. I've literally left a place that I've just had dinner, got to my vehicle, had a coughing fit, emptied the contents of my stomach, and ended up driving to a fast food place because I was hungry again because I didn't have anything in my stomach at that point. It was also pretty bad because my son at the time was pretty young, and I had to teach him how to use a oral pharyngeal, telling him that if I hit the ground, here's how you put the oral pharyngeal in so that way my tongue doesn't block my airway and I can still breathe. And then that scared the hell out of him. And why wouldn't it? And that's what I had to live with. So I adapted my entire life to that. And as of recently, they finally granted me a 10% for chronic laryngitis. As you can tell from the beginning of the podcast to now, I'm starting to sound a little raspy because I can only talk for so long before all of a sudden my throat gets really raspy. And so you can tell it's kind of getting worse. Now, they granted me 10% for chronic laryngitis, but notice that they still didn't address the coughing fits. And they're not going to either. Because if I try to put in for it, it's going to open the door for them to try to bring that percentage back to zero and keep denying me that claim. And it just gets ridiculous. And this is one of the reasons why you want to maintain an active log of what you're doing, what's coming in, what's going out. Because this can get lengthy. I've been doing this for over a decade now, and I've got boxes upon boxes of paperwork in, paperwork out. So learn from the abuse that has been imparted on me by the VA and become organized. It doesn't take very long, and once you start it, it's easy to maintain, but you've got to maintain it, and you got to stay vigilant. Even after you think you've won and you got a rating decision that you accept, that's great. 3-hole punch that sucker. Put the date that you received it on, even though it's dated, put the date you received it on the top page. 3-hole punch that sucker. Stick it into your 5-inch 3-ring binder in the section of incoming VA paperwork, and have that in a position in a place that you know exists, so that way there's no question of where it's at. And that way, in the event down the road, all of a sudden they put you in for a re-eval and they try to take it all away, then you have something to fall back on because you know everything was organized. If you don't do that, then I really kind of have no sympathy for you. Once again, I tell vets all the time, look, you can send me a description. You send me a summary, send me your story. I'll read it on the podcast. That way others can understand where, what, when, how, what location, because that's going to help other veterans who are in that area. So by taking the time now, even if it's a good story, I don't care if it's good or bad. If you had a good experience at a VA hospital, I'd love to hear it. I'd love to be able to tell that story. In Virginia, I would go to the Hampton VA hospital. My primary care provider was pretty awesome. Matter of fact, I knew that if my appointment was at 5 p.m., that I wasn't seeing him until 7 or 7:30 p.m. that night. I'd still be there an hour early, but I'd also bring a book because I knew I was going to be there for a long haul. And he would always apologize. Sorry for being so late. The guys left out in the lobby when everybody else is gone. We understand. We're okay with that. And why was my doctor so great? Because he refused to use us as a 15-minute billet. He would give us the time that we needed. I always felt bad for him. I always told him, look, nothing changes. If something changes, if something pops up, hurts, gets worse or whatever, I'll be the first one to contact you. But I feel like I'm wasting your time. I come in, you ask me, how are things? And I tell you, I hurt. It's the same hurt. It's not going to get any worse. I work out every day. I'm trying to maintain the muscle mass that I have now. So, we're good here. Just refill my meds and I'll move along. That might open up a little bit of time for you to be able to do what you want to do. So I'm pretty sure he's already left that VA hospital by now because he was already telling me that they were trying to hammer him, add more patients, but not give him more time. And he used to come in on his days off to do his admin so that way he could give all quality time to his patients. That's a good doctor right there. So stay organized, be proactive about your own case, because if you don't, then the VA is going to crush you. Cut and dry, the VA is going to crush you. Okay? So that's my advice. Once again, check out the Facebook group and check out the like page on Facebook. It'll give you the updated Excel document of articles, and I have them dated on the first column so that way you can see what date they were posted onto the Excel document. The links you can literally copy and paste into your browser, so that way you don't have to worry about clicking on a link on the Excel document because of viruses or what have you. So it's a little safer that way. But you can also download it if you wanted to and keep up with it. So I try to update that a couple times a week, so that way you keep abreast of the stories or how stories are unfolding, because there's always stories. Every single day there's new articles that come out, and they are not talked about on the mainstream media. So, think about it like the veteran suicide epidemic. You still have veterans committing suicide every day, but you don't ever see it in the news. And why is that? When something becomes not big of a deal, then people tend to forget about it. But just because it's not in the media doesn't mean it's not existing. And it is existing. And hopefully at some point it'll be fixed. Same way with veteran homelessness and joblessness and so forth. But now my big fight is to expose the corrupt VA, so they stop abusing veterans and start doing what they're supposed to be doing. Over $200 billion a year annual budget, and we're still out here fighting. That's ridiculous. So keep tuned. I'm going to keep trying to put good to knows onto the podcast, and including some of my stories. So I guess I need to add my coughing fit story to my list, so that way I don't repeat it. But tell your friends, spread the word. I need people that I can interview. So if you have a story and you want to tell it, we do a phone interview. I record it. I go in, I edit what I need to edit, and then I put it on YouTube. So I guess I need to look on Apple to see what I need to do to get the podcast on Apple as well. So with that being said, hope you guys have a great day, and I'll post another one soon.